It is my absolute pleasure to be joined by Albert Breer, the senior NFL reporter and lead content strategist over at the Monday Morning Quarterback. Albert, thank you for taking the time.
You got it, Will.
So, obviously, Michael Penix, Kirk Cousins, that whole ordeal is still the big talk here in Atlanta. I saw
Yep.
Laws in his mailbag earlier this week spoke about the Vikings being up front with Kirk Cousins about kind of their plan to draft a quarterback in this draft fairly high up, who they believed would be the future at the position. Um, did you get the sense that the Falcons, I mean, obviously we know that they didn't form Kirk Cousins and his team until they were on the clock, according to reports, but when do you think the Falcons kind of like thought they would go along this path? And do you believe when they were negotiating with Kirk back in March that, maybe they felt he would be the future at the position, or was this always
Yeah.
a little of the plan?
I don't think they knew when they signed Kirk that they were going to take Michael Penix 8th overall. I think they had an idea that they could consider a quarterback there, and there's a reason why you get on a plane and fly all the way from Atlanta to Seattle, and they had planned to fly to Ann Arbor too and work out JJ McCarthy. So they were looking at the possibility here of doing it. I really think like it was a gradual thing through the process and meeting with him, at the combine, and then, sitting down as a staff and going back over the tape again. And, I think there's the other piece of this too, which is, there's, some level of PTSD in that organization over the way they had to live the last couple of years.
Yeah.
They offloaded Matt Ryan, I think, a year before they would have liked to because of the Deshaun Watson mess. And, so they go into 2022 with Marcus Mariota as their quarterback. And, obviously that works out the way it works out. And coming back and trying to make it work with Desmond Ridder the next year, they had sort of tried to tread water at the position. And I didn't totally disagree with the strategy that you want to build up the rest of the roster and then, have it ready for your quarterback whenever he comes in. Just that the sand ran out of the hourglass for Arthur Smith, and it came close to happening for Terry Fontenot too. And so to think that like you wouldn't be marked by your experiences if you're Terry Fontenot, if you're Arthur Blank, be foolish. We're all marked by our experiences. So to some degree, there's a determination in the organization to get it right. And, I think you can say that, by doing it this way, they overcorrected the problem. But I think they had an idea that they could take Michael Penix, in the first round when they signed Kirk Cousins, but they weren't close to finalizing that decision yet. And, after 2 years of, again, treading water at the position,
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't just not sign Kirk Cousins on the possibility that you were going to look at Penix as, a very real and apparent pick at 8th overall.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, especially last year, was kind of we saw the limitations of what an advancing roster could do with subpar quarterback play,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, I don't think they expected the level of turnovers from Desmond Ridder that they had. That was really the thing that kind of shot them in the foot. That just kind of came out of nowhere. If you look at his college history and just the way he'd even played in his 4 starts, like he had not turned the ball over. Like that was something where if he could just protect the ball and be league average, everybody felt like the roster was capable of a playoff run. And so that obviously didn't happen. The head coach gets fired, but the general manager and the front office are still in place. And so they still have that kind of, memory, the reflexive memory of the importance of the quarterback position. And so they go and address it with the best possible option in free agency in Kirk Cousins. Then you get a new coaching staff in here. And as well as anybody, kind of as the draft process goes along, the coaching staff, members of the organization who aren't in the front office, who aren't scouts, their opinions start to blend in and bleed into the whole draft board. And it does seem like the coaching staff really liked Michael Penix. The front office really liked Michael Penix, and they felt like they couldn't pass up this opportunity. So I know that the kind of big sticking point for a lot of people is that rookie contract and not kind of realizing the full value of the monetary advantage with this roster. But I almost look at that as the actual cost they're paying for getting it wrong over the last couple of years. The upside is that maybe if you're not in this position the next couple of years because you have Kirk Cousins and you're expecting to win in the short term, you're really just using one draft asset to potentially find your franchise quarterback, as opposed to having to trade up from the 20s into the top 10 in kind of a weaker draft class from what we're hearing at quarterback for the next couple of years. Do you think that that's something? I mean, obviously they're willing to eat that, but how do you weigh the negatives of not realizing the financial benefits of a rookie quarterback contract with just kind of the like, let's take it now approach, let's get it off and then we'll figure it out later?
It's the Packers just went through, and I think the Packers and Falcons situations are very different because Aaron Rodgers had equity in Green Bay with the fan base of the organization that Kirk doesn't have right now, which could really complicate things if Kirk doesn't play well and say Penix banks a really strong preseason, right? But like the Packers gamble here was that Jordan Love was going to be really good because they are not going to, for the most part. I mean, like you look at it, it's going to be hard for them to realize the benefit of having quarterback on a rookie contract. They did for 1 year, right? Like, but they were still eating the, and like I'd say they weren't even, really feeling that benefit because they were still dealing with the cap issues that were left behind by offloading Aaron Rodgers. And so they're going to go from Rodgers to Love without ever really having, experienced that. And I think you're looking at the same thing with the Falcons going from Cousins to Penix, even if it works out, right? So I've got the cap numbers in front of me. Kirk Cousins, if you like, let's say you have 2 years of Kirk Cousins, then you offload him and you bring in Michael Penix. And let's say on top of that, you are, still you get somebody else to sign him that offsets the $10 million that's due in 2026, the guaranteed $10 million in 2026, right? You're still responsible for $50 million, in cap charges. Or now I'm looking at it. I got to do the math.
It gets wonky.
It's actually 25. So you'd be looking at $25 million in cap charges in 2026, and that's equal to his cap number for this year. So, like, you're not really getting the benefit of having Penix on a rookie deal in year 3 because now you've got Kirk Cousins' number in addition to what Penix is going to cost you, and then after year 3, you got to make a decision on the 5th-year option, which puts you where the Packers are. So, it's one of those where it's like it almost puts more pressure on you to get it right because, like, by the time Michael Penix is playing and proven, you're going to be paying him, so you don't get the benefit of having him on the rookie contract. So again, it's complicated in all kinds of ways, and I still think, like, if you get 2 to 3 years out of Kirk and 10 years out of Penix, like, then we're not worried about this. Nobody worries about what the Bills gave up for Josh Allen. Nobody worries about what the Chiefs gave up for Patrick Mahomes. And it was a lot in both cases. So if this adds up to 2 to 3 years of Kirk and then 10 years of Penix, well, then, if Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are going to be in their jobs for a long time, and we're going to have forgotten that we talked about any of this. And maybe for them, the flip side is, well, if it doesn't work out, we're all fired anyway. So,
yeah, we won't have to clean up the mess.
But it does complicate the advantage you'd normally have, when you have a quarterback on a rookie contract.
Absolutely. And I think a different position, but a similar type of example where in the moment, all we were talking about was what the Falcons gave up. That's with Julio Jones, the trade up to go get him right after AJ Green goes off the board. And it was one of those where it's like, wow, you're going to give all that away for a wide receiver. Now in hindsight, hey, the Falcons won that trade. He's one of the best players in franchise history. Will be in the Ring of Honor. You mentioned the Packers. It's funny. Everybody's talking about the Packers model. I think you just laid out the real Packers model that the Falcons should be compared to, where it is, you're going to be eating that sunk cost of Kirk Cousins when and if you decide to move on from him, which is going to offset any of those financial gains. But maybe they're hoping that given the work put into the roster over the last couple of years, they don't need to do massive retooling over the next couple of years.
Right.
You had a mailbag that went up yesterday where you mentioned kind of your top 5 contenders in the NFC. The Packers are currently 5th in that ranking for you. Where do you see the Falcons? Because I think they're a really hard team to pin down right now.
Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
that's where, like, if you're Kirk, like, it could be aggravating, like, not using the 8th overall pick on someone else, because obviously, like, you're drafting a position that's not gonna help Kirk, right? Win in the short term, and I would say the Falcons' primary need right now and going into the draft was pass rush. And every pass rusher in the draft was available to them. Byron Murphy and Dallas Turner and Leatu Latu, like, all those guys were sitting there for them. I think there's obvious pressure on Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake to find a way to generate a pass rush and to get the most out of their second and third round picks and guys that can help them up front on defense. I think the offense is going to be fine. Like, I think, like, if you look at, like, the group that they have, the offensive line's solid, not spectacular, but very solid. There isn't a gaping hole on the line. And then, at the skill positions, you've got 3 guys that you drafted in the top 10, and you added a couple guys who can really fly around Drake London at receiver. I look at, like, and then, you're assuming you're going to get good quarterback play out of Kirk Cousins. I just look at it like so much is going to come down to their ability to rush the passer on defense. And I do think that the NFC is stronger than it was. And if you look at the 5 teams I have there, it's chalk, but it's really hard to say, like, the Lions aren't going to be in the mix. The Niners aren't going to be in the mix. The Eagles aren't going to be in the mix.
Yeah.
Like, those are all teams that are proven. The Rams, I had them in there at 4, and they were going through a cap reset last year and made the playoffs. Like, I think they've always been able to, they deserve the benefit of the doubt. They've been able to make it work. So, and then the Packers, Matt LaFleur just keeps winning. And last year, moving off of Aaron Rodgers, integrating Jordan Love, working through some struggles with Jordan Love. Like, he wasn't perfect the whole year, but he finished strong. And then you look at the young receivers that they have around him, and then the talent on defense, and hopefully you get a bump with Jeff Hafley coming in as their defensive coordinator. And they've had frontline guys like Jair Alexander and Rashawn Gary at premium positions there for a while. And it's hard for me to look at, like, those 5 and say, like, okay, this team's going to break through or that team's going to break through, because those 5, I think, all have a very solid foundation coming back.
So then what about the NFC South? How do you see that kind of shaping up?
That's where I think you could look at the Falcons and say, so I think the Buccaneers would take exception at this, because they have, more or less been the power in that division for the last 4 years, since Brady got there. And it certainly looks like, they've hit on Baker Mayfield. But I think Atlanta should be right there, and competing for the division title. New Orleans has had success over the past few years. They were competitive last year. I think, ultimately what you're going to have is those 3 teams probably right around 500 competing for the division title. That would be my guess, which is sort of what it was last year, So,
yeah.
If Atlanta gets great play out of Kirk Cousins and he uses this as fuel, and I hate to use a cliche, but, like, uses this as kind of a hair across his ass to put together the kind of year that he had a couple of years ago, his first year under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. I certainly think that they can, be on that level with the Buccaneers and compete with the Buccaneers, and maybe get to double-digit wins and win the division. They're definitely in that mix. And I thought Raheem Morris has deserved his shot for the last couple of years, and so I think, bringing in Raheem should really spark something there too. Zach Robinson has been knocking on the door being an offensive coordinator for a while. They've got a lot of good things going on there. It's just, the Bill Belichick situation and the handling of the quarterback situation is sort of cast a cloud over a lot of that.
Definitely. Yeah, it has. I mean, because it felt like they were building a little bit of momentum, right? And then took a step back, at least in terms of public perception. But that's a great segue. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was the coaching staff. Yep. What do your thoughts on Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson? He hasn't done the play calling, before in a full season capacity. And then Jimmy Lake. What are your thoughts on the hirings there?
Yeah, I think you look at the staff and there's synergy coming in because they've all worked together, and Raheem's a really great unifier of people. And I think from a leadership perspective, there's no question you're going to have that in spades. And like he is bringing people who know the expectation and what it's going to be. And, I think you're going to get the sort of energy in the building that the Rams have had for the last 7 years under Sean McVay. So that's good. You are projecting, of course, Zach Robinson and Jimmy Lake into those roles, running the offense and the defense. But Jimmy Lake is an incredibly experienced defensive coach, and his history in the college game obviously precedes him. And Zach Robinson is somebody who was sought after, and the Bears, the Patriots, like there were teams that were really hot after him, and the Falcons are fortunate that he had made the decision ahead of time. Like, I'm going with Raheem wherever Raheem goes. Like, if he gets one, I'm going to go with him. So yeah, I think from that perspective, like they're in a really good spot. Those aren't the most experienced play callers, from an NFL perspective, but both those guys are plenty qualified for their jobs, and I think they've got the right leader in Raheem. So, short of hiring the greatest coach of all time, I think the Falcons did pretty well for themselves across the board in coaching.
Awesome. Please go check out his work, SI.com, the Monday Morning Quarterback. Albert, this was great. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Will.